Excellent. So, to begin with, my name is Andrew Macklin. I'm an actor and qualified career coach. I'm joined today, wonderfully, by Tom Creed, who is a director of both theatre and opera, as well as being involved in multiple other campaigns and projects, which we might get into very quickly in this conversation. But Tom, as you know, this is sort of, these series of talks are predominantly around the idea of what it means to live well as a creative in the world today. Which, when I started the idea of this maybe about a year ago, was very different to maybe how it is now. And so, but I think it's a question that continually needs a little bit of poking at and quizzing. But I'd like to, for those who maybe aren't familiar with you or your work, I think it's always really useful to kind of begin sort of at the very early points. And so, as a director, when did that first speak to you? Presumably as a young person, what was the first sort of intuitive instance where you thought, oh, this is something really important?
So I suppose in terms of getting to that point, I studied music as a child. I didn't study the theatre. And I did like theory and the piano, and I was never really interested enough in being good at the piano to practice the piano. And then discovered the theatre as a teenager in youth theatre in Cork, and also in school with a really inspiring drama teacher. And then studied arts at UCC, studied philosophy and English, with the idea, I guess, that as most people who are heading for the theatre at that age, that I would be an actor. And it was a moment in Cork where kind of the theatre was quite cool. In my final year in school, we were brought to see the original production of Disco Pigs by Andy Walsh with Eileen Walsh and Cillian Murphy, which had just happened. And this was like a young Cork play with young Cork people in it, which was touring around the world. The same year, Druid came on tour to the Everyman in Cork with the original Leanan trilogy. And sort of these were kind of, this was theatre that sort of felt like rock and roll. And so I had this idea that I would be an actor, and then kind of realized very quickly that I started directing at the beginning of my second year in college, and realized very quickly that it was something that I really responded to and kind of had a hunger for. And I think, you know, it kind of came out of, I think, being kind of unsatisfied with myself as an actor, but also being unsatisfied with the kind of directing I was getting from other directors, and sort of feeling like I wasn't able to do the kind of acting that I was expecting of other people. And then it just kind of took off, and you know, kind of series of having my own company in Cork, working on a trainee program called Seeds with Rough Magic Theatre Company in Dublin. And then working, you know, having the good fortune in the mid-2000s to actually get a job as a theatre director, like on the staff of Rough Magic, which is a great independent theatre company in Dublin. And, you know, something which I certainly see now is very rare for emerging theatre directors, which is actually for a company to take you on and actually pay you a salary and create a context for you to direct a number of productions that you can develop over time, rather than everything being project-based and everything being profit share. And in a way, I think you know, we haven't got back to the conditions that we had in the mid-2000s. That's not to say that, you know, it is a good idea to aspire to the kind of economic circumstances that we had in Ireland in that time, because we saw where that ended up. But certainly it was the case that I was one of a number of theatre directors in Ireland who, I guess, benefited from the increased funding and increased opportunities that were around during, I guess, what we call now the Celtic Tiger.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, looking back on being in Ireland at around that time, there did seem to be more time and space, despite there being, to some degree, less money. It felt less cash rich, but there were people in positions like you were suggesting around, you might have a year in a theatre company, potentially working as a director, which now is much more project-based. It's really interesting thing to hear you say around this sense, because quite often when people talk at the very beginning around what really appealed to them about their craft or what they were doing, it's very much a sort of thing that they were chasing. And I think it's really interesting and kind of important to hear that to some degree as well for you, it was a dissatisfaction to a degree. with acting, what that might be like, that actually nudged you in what later turned out to be the right direction. You mentioned a little bit around when you sort of finished training, and you'd said about starting up your own company, and hearing it, that sounded like quite a jump. Some people can spend, years toying with that idea. And so I guess I wonder, as someone in Cork who had experienced all this rock and roll theatre, and it sounded like you saw some of the best stuff knocking about at that time, what were the obstacles for you? So as someone who in that latter time in training said, acting's not for me, directing is more actually what's my fascination. Were there any obstacles at the beginning in Cork as you set out?
I mean, Cork is a small place and continues to be a small place, and it's a brilliant place. But really the way to make a life in the theatre in Cork was to make a company. I think I think we were also seeing companies like Cork Midsummer, which Pat Kiernan and Enda Walsh were running at the time.
Oh, we're back. Sorry, Tom. I can edit that out.
Me or you?
I can't tell. I usually get a notification on my screen that says when my Wi-Fi is being bothered.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm going to move on to my other network.
Do it indeed. But I can edit this out.
And maybe we can go back.
I mean, it's the vein of our lives at the moment, isn't it? Wi-Fi connection. It's good to have second options, Tom. Well done. We're back, I think. Yeah, we can just use audio eventually. Yeah, I've pressed record again, so we're going to carry on. But I wonder if we could.
Great.
You just mentioned there that I thought it's a wonderful phrase for a book that you could at some point write, which was the idea of to start life as working in the theatre in Cork. It was very much integral for you to form your own company. But I mean, how did you go about doing that? What were the sort of, or were there any blocks for you in starting that process?
I mean, I guess, it was natural to set up one's own theatre company in Cork. I think the people we were inspired by, like Pat Kiernan and Enda Walsh at Cork Midsummer, were doing that. Of course, finance was difficult. There wasn't a lot of money. But in a way, we took advantage of not having a lot of money by using the other resources that were available to us, one of which was people. So actually we ended up doing some very large productions because everyone was kind of working for free or working for very little money. We did a production which used the whole building of the Everyman Theatre in Cork and 50 performers, and a performance that brought the audience on a train to Cove, which is in a suburb outside Cork City. So I guess we tried to, use the limitations that we had and try and use the resources that were available and try and not let our imaginations be constrained in a way. And Cork, around the time when I was leaving university, which was in 2001, or soon after, Cork got the designation as European Capital of Culture for 2005. And so really there was a generation of us that hung around kind of to see what opportunities this would present us. And that was a really interesting year. It was quite an inspiring year in terms of experiencing a lot of things happening in Cork. But as with many capitals of culture, also they're complex and controversial things. And I guess one of the things that happened after that year was that many of us left. We felt like we had exhausted what was available in our home city, and moved on, I guess, looking for inspiration elsewhere.
Yeah, that does seem to be something that happens with capitals of culture, or the fear of them, that there'll be an influx and then a draining away. But the two things that kind of stick out to me from that is one, very much that you were led by those who'd come before. So there was a clear history of independent people setting up companies where you were, and that was your mind frame of what theatre was. And so it was a natural step. And the other thing that comes across there, for me at least, is the idea of, well, what are the other resources that are currently available? And actually, it's a lot of people willing to work for very little, which I think, not that I want to encourage people to work for very little, but I think there is something maybe in our current times to the idea that there are other resources. Because quite often I think it can be a block for some people, thinking, well, if the finances aren't there, then why begin, to a degree? I wonder briefly, and this is, I guess, a massive topic, but what's your sense now? I mean, it feels like you had that journey that was very much self-created, coming out of Cork, making your own work, sticking around for Capital of Culture, and then a move to Dublin, and then some work, obviously, which you built on. What's your sense of what are the current difficulties? And obviously there's some obvious ones, but how do you think things have changed for directors in Ireland starting off now? What would be the obstacles now?
I really don't envy the generations of directors who've come after mine. I think there was a prospect that you could make a life as a director here in the mid-2000s. That a kind of a combination of your own projects, working as an assistant, and working for some of the bigger companies, that was something that you could really aspire to. I think that's, the art sector and the theatre especially, but I think all of the arts haven't recovered from the crash. Mm-hmm. And I think the resources have been spread very thinly. And on the other hand, you have training programs like the directing masters at the Lear Theatre School here in Dublin, which didn't exist when I was there, or when I was starting. So there are many opportunities for development, but actually there are far fewer opportunities and far fewer resources to make work. You see the idea that, as a director, you could have worked on a number of projects at the same time, a number of projects a year. As a young director, I did have the opportunity to work with some of the best actors. But I think it's hard. And I think, in a way, there's a generation that came after me that emerged in a crisis. And now, just as we nearly were finding our way out of that crisis, they're plunged into another crisis. And so that kind of, I suppose we need to find a way for the sector to be more resilient, and for us to, make sure that we're creating opportunities for new directors and other theatre artists, but actually also for the established ones, because that's, in a way, just as difficult.
I've been waiting for that cat to appear. Tom, you mentioned a word there that is on a lot of people's lips at the moment, and I'm sure in a lot of funding packages and a lot of different conversations around resilience. And I wonder, two things came to my head. One was what you feel young directors starting now, either leaving training or about to go into training, what they need to know. Because this conversation around resilience, I think, is a lot about, what is now required to be starting in the industry. And it's horrible, I think, to ask to give advice to someone whose position you're not in. But what's your sense of what directors now starting in Ireland, what do they need to know about what their moving into and what the industry is like at the moment?
I suppose for me, it's important for people to be curious. And also to really work on actually what is it the thing that's of importance to them, what is their own idea about what they're doing, what's the thing that's really of value to them. So I think for me that's really important. I think it's really important to make connections, and I would encourage people to really seek out the people that inspire them, seek out the people that they would like to work with. Everyone has been in that position, and generally if you reach out to somebody, the worst thing that they can say is no. But you know, I think don't be afraid to ask for help. Mm-hmm. I would say for people in Ireland, the only way I think I could have kind of found my way through the last 10 years was also to have relationships internationally. I think in a small country, I think, you know, it would be great if we could aspire to make one's whole living in one, and make all of one's work in one country, but actually whether it's traveling and working abroad or whether it's touring, it's really difficult without kind of looking, you know, beyond our borders. And I think that's going to become even more important actually in the coming years, because I guess our Irish theatre has had a natural relationship with the UK, but you know, it's not clear exactly how that's going to change with everything that's happening at the moment. But certainly for me, relationships in France and Belgium and other countries in Europe have really been a lifeline. For me, also working in another art form. So 10 years ago, I also started to work in opera, which of course is, you know, not entirely dissimilar to theatre. And it was also, I guess, a way of reconnecting with the music that I had studied as a child before I gave it up for the theatre in my teens. But for me, the flexibility of being able to work not only in Ireland, and also to be able to work in another art form has meant that I've had a much better relationship with Ireland and a much better relationship with the theatre, because I guess I haven't been entirely dependent on it. And so I'd encourage people really to cultivate that. But for me, one of the big things is really not to be afraid to contact people, to seek out opportunities, and more, I think also directors kind of have to be producers. I think like when I was starting 15 years ago, there was more of a sense where you could be a jobbing director and you would be asked to come and do projects. I think more and more, certainly in this country, you have to be a little bit more, I don't like to use the word entrepreneurial because I think, I'm not crazy about the connotations of it, but I think it is, you have to be more of a producer, and I think you have to make your opportunities, and also find the people that you want to work with. So, there are kind of many people that I've worked with over and over and over and over again, some for more than 20 years. And also, I also continue to find new people to work with. So, I think I'm really energized by working with students, and I'm really energized by working with young artists. So all of those things, that's not super clear. I guess I'll say one more thing, which is not something for everyone, but because actually a lot of the artists that I really admire are ones who are very single-minded and have a very clear kind of compulsion and a very clear urgency about a certain idea. And I'm interested in, particularly in those artists. But I guess I also have spent a good part of the last sort of 12 or 13 years working in festivals, or working in artist development and working with other artists on helping them make their projects. And actually I've become clearer about my own work as an artist through working with other artists, because when I'm making a festival, when I'm choosing the kinds of artists that I would like to work with, I always go for the ones who have a kind of single-mindedness and whose work is not like anything else. And sometimes, you know, I would look back at work that I did before and I thought, oh yeah, that production actually I was wearing my influences very heavily there. Or maybe I was doing that production in that way because I thought a certain person would see it and, you know, it would lead to another opportunity. And in my work as a festival maker, I'm always interested in the people whose work is not like anything else and where there's a single-mindedness and where there's an urgency. And so in a way, I've tried to find a way to look at my own work as a director that way and go, what is the thing about this which is singular? What is the thing that I think about the art form and about the world that I'm trying to communicate here?
There's so much in there. I mean, from what you were last talking about, it feels like you're working with other artists and helping them develop has given you multiple perspectives with which to look back on your own work. So in creating festivals and recognizing what you like in the artists that you want, that urgency, there's a sense of, well, actually, from that perspective, in my own work, I do want to be creating more of that to a degree. And I loved what you were saying at the beginning as well, which I think is something that we're not necessarily told about quite a lot, that sense of actually, you know, being curious in your career. And it sounds like you have been open with relation to, well, where else could I work internationally? And actually, I'm interested in opera. But a sort of inspiration, so hunting out the people, hunting is a too strong a term, but finding the people that really inspire you and connecting with them. And it feels like for you, you've gained a lot from expanding in that way. I recognize that is, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more on that just briefly, because I recognize it can be, certainly from working with lots of different actors and lots of different people within the arts, there can, I think, quite naturally become a sort of relational clash between the idea of being outside and inside of an industry. Quite a lot of artists can, to a degree, think of themselves as being outside of something and thinking, oh, there's an elite echelon of artists that are making things and I'm outside of that. And that perspective can, I guess, stop someone making a connection, stopping them, like you say, reaching out and, well, what's the worst that can happen? They can just say no. Well, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about how either you have seen yourself in relation to that when you started off. What's enabled you to really begin to reach out to people? Was it a trial and error? Or was it a sense of, well, look, I'm making work, they're making work. Actually, we're all artists. Yeah, what's your sense of what's allowed you to do that, or how it's come together in your own head?
For me, it's been very kind of informal and ambient, actually. You know, I think it's important that, you know, we have enough confidence in ourselves to see ourselves as part of the same community. But for me, it's also, you know, a lot of my relationships have come out of traveling and being at festivals and being at performances and running into people and being open and being curious and following up with people. And I guess I know myself, I'm sometimes not as good as I would, or not as confident as I would like to be in terms of kind of, you know, putting it out there and contacting somebody. But for me, I guess that, you know, I suppose I've built up a kind of, I guess, a web of connections over the last 20 years that I can draw on. And that's, for me, that's also, I think it's important, you know, to make relationships that are not just about, you know, what is that going to do for me now? What is that going to do? That it's not transactional, actually. So there's that, you know, and it's come from, you know, being curious about other art forms, about what's happening in other places. And I think those kinds of, the people who kind of engage with the arts that way kind of attract each other in a way. And so, you know, I still have relationships with kind of people who would be much more senior than I am in the performing arts that I would have met after a show in Edinburgh 15 years ago, or, you know, sitting next to at a conference, or, so I think for me that work is also a life's work in a way. I think that sort of working on relationships and making it not transactional, so that then when there is something that you can do together, that you're not cold calling people in a way.
It seems, and I could be horribly off here, but it seems very much like what's enabled that to a degree for you is that sense of, like you were saying, that confidence of, well, I am part of this community, and therefore it is natural that I would be at these conferences, I would go to these shows, I would talk to these people, and there's less of what can often occur, which is this sort of inequality that can be created by some people, a sense of, well, I'm outside of this, I'm not really a part of it. And it feels a little bit like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it seems like an instinctive thing for you actually to kind of feel like, well, I'm creating, I'm of this industry, and so it's natural for me to be talking, but not in a transactional way, which feels like also another natural offshoot to just being a part of a community. Is that sort of accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and it's funny because sometimes I feel I do too much of that actually, and I don't spend enough time being an artist actually, and I think juggling all of those things also makes it feel sometimes like there isn't enough time for everything, so like making productions, working with other artists, the kind of advocacy work that I'm doing with the National Campaign for the Arts, maintaining a network of international connections. It also, I certainly feel sometimes like things have, I spread myself a bit thin as well. But for me, I think that, these relationships and partnerships and collaborations and networks, actually, particularly in this lockdown, like I feel like I've had, in a way, I haven't felt, as entirely as isolated as I might, because actually there have been so many opportunities to engage with different international colleagues and through kind of workshops and conferences and things that have happened kind of over this time. And actually, I think there's a bit of rethinking that we need to do in terms of how we engage internationally, because we have to be more responsible with how we travel. But also, I think we've discovered through this kind of technology that actually there are more opportunities for people to make international connections that maybe thought that was beyond them. And I guess, I hope kind of over the next while, I think the thing I said earlier also about kind of Ireland needing to work harder on its international connections, I think this kind of technology might actually be a good first step, even though it can't quite make up for the live experience of being in rooms with people. I think there's quite a lot that you can do over this technology.
I think Ireland too has a very useful position in that its theatre is already and has been quite international for quite a considerable amount of time. It's internationally known, and so I think those strands are already kind of open there. Something I'm really interested in, because we talked a little bit before we started with the National Campaign for the Arts and the incredible work that's being done within that, especially during COVID, to try and really genuinely support artists and get money from the government to support artists in a way that might not have happened, oddly and terrifyingly, without it. And so many artists could be, as you were talking about earlier, that sense of just solely focused on work and art, and might not have chose to engage with the wider community. And it feels like the advocacy work that you were involved with has been, something that could have been seen as optional to other people. Some artists might simply have said, well, look, that's nothing to do with me, someone else will fix that. And so I'm really interested in because you started with that, you said in 2016. So what brought you to that campaign?
Most people get involved with a campaign like NCFA at a specific moment. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a moment where the then government did, in a way, what was seen as really downgrading the place of the Department of Culture, and sort of rolled it in with regional and rural development and other things under the then minister. And it sort of just felt like having, in a way, spent half a decade or more kind of trying to recover from the crash. I certainly felt like just that I had had enough. And actually, I reached out to the then chair of NCFA and said, "What can I do to help?" And I guess the other thing that I had at that time was I had the kind of rare combination of a bunch of quite well-paid work at a certain point coming up, which meant that I had a certain amount of time that I could devote to it. And it's interesting, you know, we're talking a lot about universal basic income these days, and about like how, you know, how it is possible to, you know, structure kind of public finances in a way where it makes it possible for people to do things for their community and do things that actually they're really interested in. And in a way, you know, the fact that many of us have been surviving on the pandemic unemployment payment here over the last 6 months actually has also bought us a little bit of time and space to work on this kind of advocacy. But so for me, it was kind of the combination of having a bit of time and actually not being strapped financially, and that it meant I had a bit of time to devote to it. And, you know, it's also tricky for freelancers to put time towards these kind of advocacy roles, because it's time that you're not spending on your own work. But it started there, and I guess there was I took on a particular role at the beginning, which was about sort of reorganizing the local activity around the country. So when the Campaign for the Arts had started during the crash, when there was a proposal to make massive cuts and to get rid of Culture Ireland and all these things, the local constituency activity had been quite strong, but I guess it had sort of become focused more on the steering committee. And I suppose we felt it was important that politicians and other public representatives were hearing from their local arts workers and audiences and allies all over the country. So in a way, that was the first project that I did, was kind of reorganizing that. You know, then I guess there's been, you know, this sort of regular annual activity that NCFA does in terms of meeting with the various stakeholders, the government departments, the agencies like the Arts Council, making sure that the voice of the sector is heard, also consulting with the sector, so to make sure that, you know, we're capturing what's needed. But of course, when the pandemic crisis started earlier this year, it became clear that actually our voices needed to be heard louder and more often. And yeah, so that, you know, it became a really, I think, you know, something that I've really been glad to be part of. You know, also as something kind of to cling on to during the pandemic, and something to give purpose to a time where sometimes that's been difficult to find. But, you know, I found like the campaign has really galvanized artists and arts workers and arts organizations all over the country. You know, one of the advantages of this kind of technology is that it's allowed it to become a little bit less Dublin centric. You know, when we have public meetings, many more people can attend because, you know, people don't have to travel. And, you know, I guess, you know, we've had some success in terms of, you know, financial and other supports that, you know, we've got from the Department for the Arts Council. But there's a lot more to do. I think one of the other great things that's come out of this time actually is that we've established or built on a really strong collegiate relationship with the government departments and with the various state agencies. And in a way, it feels like the first time in my career where the relationship with those agencies feels much more collaborative and less just a kind of going cap in hand in a way. And I think the idea of a sector that is prepared to be more political and is prepared to advocate for what it needs, but also which is really kind of able to work in partnership with the government agencies. For me, I think we're seeing results which are coming out of that.
The impression I get is that, well, one, to go back to that idea of entrepreneurialism as a creative artist. And although it might be a bit of a dirty capitalist word, it seems like there is something that is now required in being an artist or a creative freelancer that involves, like you say, this producer element as well as an artist and maker element. And also, as well, it feels like something in advocacy. So there's something about being engaged in your art form at a political level. And it feels like, hearing you talk about it, it feels like actually that those strands, that political element has maintained to a degree a certain amount of momentum for you through this period. And that when you're working on those different levels and maybe seeing what you do in a broader perspective, not only within your own art, but within the community and beyond, it feels like that, it feels like it's necessary in today's world, a little bit, just from the conversation we're having, but also that it feels like for you, it is really helping you and engaging you and creating a kind of momentum through. Is that somewhere on the right page, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think where it comes back to, and I think it's why I started working in arts development and festivals and those things years ago, was because I guess it felt for me important to work to create the kind of conditions that I would aspire to work in. Mm-hmm. And, as somebody who has a certain amount of privilege, both in terms of, my upbringing and my education and the opportunities that I've had, also to do what I can to create that context for other artists and for other arts workers. And I think, while I really admire, as I said before, those artists who are very single-minded and who, can really work on one thing for years, and really focus on that. I really admire that arc, and I love, when I'm listening to music or reading or watching film or performance, I'm really drawn to work by those kinds of artists. But I think in my own work, there's a kind of world making involved in it, and that there's something about the work has something about how I perceive the world and how I would aspire the world to be. And so putting the artwork into the world also has something to do with that. It has a kind of advocacy in it. Not a big P politics at all, but there's something about, how we might live. But then I suppose it feels natural for me to also be, trying to play a small role in creating better conditions for artists and arts workers and arts organizations to be able to do the thing that they do, and to try and communicate something of the impact that kind of living and working in the arts and culture has had on my life over 40 years. And unfortunately, in a society like we're in now, where everything is sort of, or almost everything is reduced to finance and is reduced to transactions, and the value of something is often considered only a monetary one. But actually, to articulate all of the things that we know subconsciously that the arts can do for us in terms of inspiration and distraction and community and all of those things. And in a way, one of the things that, one of the consequences of the pandemic, that maybe we can take some solace in, is the fact that people have engaged with culture to such an extent, whether that it's the films that they're watching, or the books that they're reading, or the music that they're listening to. And also maybe, one of the things we've been working on with NCFA is to remind people that, you don't have something like Normal People on TV being nominated for Emmy Awards without an Arts Council bursary supporting Sally Rooney at the beginning of her career, or the Lear Theatre School, where Paul Mescal and a bunch of the other actors went, or all of the development that led, the directors, the cinematographers to do their first project. And, that doesn't all come out of nowhere. That all comes out of an ecology. And also that, so much more and more now that all of the art forms are porous. That something like Normal People is literature and theatre and music and visual art. So, you don't have one without the other. But I guess people have been reminded, I think, that that culture is a huge part of our lives, and that we would miss it if it wasn't there. And also people are missing the opportunity, of course, that it provides for community and physical connection, and a kind of something out in the world, which is a context for us to come together around beauty and ideas. And you can certainly feel, there's a real hunger among people to get back to concerts and festivals and theatre, and that's starting very slowly. But in the meantime, I guess, with the National Campaign for the Arts, we're, we continue to make a case for it. And in a way, I found myself reflecting a lot during the pandemic on, the fact that, particularly I think in the performing arts, we put a pin in the diary somewhere in the future, and then we work towards that. Mm. And so a lot of the kind of paralysis that's come out of this time is this inability to plan. And so maybe in a way, this advocacy is also something that we can be doing now, that feels like it can have an impact now, while we're waiting to be able to be in rooms together and to rehearse and to perform and to meet audiences. That in the meantime, I guess that we can play a small role in trying to have a hand in creating the kind of world that we would like to be in, that values the arts and culture and supports the arts and culture as an integral part of society.
Having a hand in the world that you would like to create, I think that's fundamental. I mean, to have that as in part of your mind frame as what you do as an artist, I think. And I from being in at least one of those meetings, National Campaign for the Arts, I've never really felt that much a part of a community, even being quite separate from it, but being an Irish artist working separately, suddenly to be in a room with 500 people that were all the same in a way that I had never experienced before was quite lovely. And finally, just because I think it can be quite useful sometimes for artists or creatives to recognize that other artists and creatives might not know exactly what's coming next, or might only have a rough idea. And a little bit like you're referring to there, that idea that at the moment there's not that pinpoint we can stick a date in the diary coming forward. And so I wonder, for you and for your own work and what the future might hold, what's your sense of where you would like to go with it? What interests are on the horizon that are just beginning to kind of poke their heads up a little bit? I mean, you mentioned the idea of some element of politics, perhaps with a small p, being involved, so that the work that you're making has a broader, it's saying something to a wider community as well. But what interests are just at the edge of the horizon that are beginning to draw your attention?
I suppose the thing that I'm going to be starting to do soon is something that I haven't done for a long time, which is actually that I'm going back to college to do some further study. And I think that also has something to do with this thing I spoke about, which is about like trying to have a bit of control over what's happening now. And so I'm going to study something which is actually not a huge sidestep, but it's a sort of small sidestep from what I'm doing, which is a master's in art in the contemporary world at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. So I guess to kind of look to the visual arts and to how the visual arts kind of think about themselves and write about themselves. And also to think about the place of the performing arts in the visual arts, but actually also to kind of be forced to read theory and philosophy again, and to try and make myself write more, so that also I guess that I'm doing some things for myself also. Having spent a lot of the last 6 months working a lot in terms of with the campaign and the community, but actually kind of making some space for myself also to think about what I do and its relationship to the world. So that's the kind of new thing. There are projects that are waiting for when we can do them again. I made a couple of online projects in the summer, in a way that I kind of hadn't before. And I guess I'm interested in continuing to scratch around a little bit with that. I'm interested in what it means to perform on this kind of stage. but some of those things, you know. And I suppose for me, the thing I said at the very beginning, for me, curiosity is really important. And, you know, so I'm using this time also to read more than I kind of have done in a while. And, you know, I'd seen a lot of exhibitions, because that's mostly what there is to see, but there's a lot of exhibitions actually, and actually to see like physical artworks on walls. There's been something really nourishing about that. Yeah, all of those things, that sort of feels like what's next. I think that I don't know if I can think any further past that, but sort of trying to think about, you know, what might happen over the next year or so. Yeah, those things are important right now.
What comes across and what feels really important about that is this nourishing of your own curiosity actually has this, it seems to do two things. It sort of just embellishes you, but also feeds into what you are doing and opens up new horizons in that as well, whether it be opera, whether it be design and art. It feels like and quite often I think we can get a little lost in not asking ourselves what we are interested in, and much more in what does the industry require of me, or how do I fit into that particular box? Tom, thank you so much for your time. I, for one, definitely have learned significant amounts from hearing you talk, but yeah, I know you're really busy as well. So thanks for taking the time out to talk today. And it's been amazing. So thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.